I feel like, honestly, with the beginning of our country, I feel like the entrenchment of Judeo-Christian values and we tried to create a secular society, right, is honestly what kept us for a lot of years from doing the right moral thing in our country and sticking to some things we now agree to as immoral.
It was a violation of Jesus Christ's teachings. Slavery is a violation of Jesus' teachings of the Bible.
Right.
Clear contradiction.
The Bible was used to justify it.
Yes. And science is used to justify blowing Hiroshima and Nagasaki off the map. It doesn't tell you anything about science. It tells you a lot about the people who use the atomic bomb to blow Hiroshima and Nagasaki off the map.
I agree.
And just because people use the Bible to justify slavery doesn't tell you anything about the Bible. It tells you a lot about those people.
I agree. I agree. Most of us would agree that something that inflicts suffering on another being isn't good. Now that might not mean we all have the same idea of morality all the time. That might just be a common thought, simply because we're social creatures.
I agree. Morality is related to the person, not to the action.
All right. So if my personal opinion is that he is less valuable than I am because he's not Caucasian, does that make my opinion right? Just because it's my opinion?
Being relative doesn't mean that some people's morality is objectively
I
good.
can think that you're inferior to me just because you're white.
Pardon?
You're out here talking about stuff that doesn't matter.
No, but you're saying that if I have an opinion, that makes it right.
No, it does. To you, not to me.
Yeah, and guess what? If I have a racist attitude, that's absolutely wrong.
Not to me.
And if you base morality on a personal opinion,
I'm saying if I don't think racism is wrong,
that doesn't
then
mean
like
that
the
morality
KKK,
is objective, but
then I'm
objective
racist.
facts often inform the way we think and feel about things.
Yeah.
all right,
I mean,
so I'm
have you
saying
talked to the KKK about
objectively
that?
racism is wrong.
Have you talked to the KKK about that? Because they think
I
it's
sure
right.
have.
Are they allowed to say that they have morality?
Well, they're allowed to do whatever and say whatever they want to.
Right.
But I'm going to
Morality
respect
relative.
them enough to disagree with them
Morality
because I take
relative.
what they say seriously, and I'm going to look into the face of the KKK and say, I'm sorry, because a
you
human
both
being
have
has innate
different relative
value,
ideas of
your
morality.
racism is
Yes,
wrong.
you did. You just said morality is relative. Thank you.
No. I said if there is no God, morality is relative. Because if there is no God, you don't have a mind prior to the human mind that defines what's right and what's wrong. Which means it's obviously the human mind that defines right and
I think
wrong.
it's plausible to say that despite the existence of God being true or false, there's a logical explanation for why we've developed a sense of morality. Because again, we're social creatures, and often, things develop over time without there necessarily have been an intention in the first place, right? That isn't really how everything works.
All right, so what I hear you saying
What
is...
was advantageous for us, honestly?
Right. So what I hear you saying is social contract is the basis of morality. Really? Well, what happens if I want to be part of a gang? And in order to be part of the gang, I got to murder somebody. Just because there's a social contract doesn't make it right. What you're saying sounds like survival of the fittest. Whatever helps us evolutionarily advance is good. Well,
We've progressed past the point of thinking that way, but yes, I do believe that is what got us here.
okay, well then what's the basis of morality from your perspective?
The basis of my morality, which I think most people would agree, is that which inflicts suffering on another animal or another entity, that which infringes upon the well-being of others,
Good.
is generally not considered moral.
Good. Then what's the difference if I step on an ant or a cockroach or step on a baby? Is there a difference?
Well, that's the difference between your outlook and the outlook of somebody who's Jane. It's simply a relative opinion based off of, frankly, the individual lens that you see the world through. And that's only informed, frankly, by the way you grew up and the way you interpret your facts. So, realistically, you think that way because of the environment that you were brought up in. Maybe the fact that we don't all think that way is evidence that maybe we don't have some predisposition of the idea of morality.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is environment defines what's right and wrong.
No,
And
it's
I'm
what
standing
brought
here
us to
saying-
the point where our brain developed the idea of developed sentience. From there is where we got to the idea of morality.
Okay, so I'm saying I don't care if your environment taught you that other races are inferior to yours.
Of course.
Racism is wrong not because I grew up in an environment that taught me that racism is wrong. Racism is wrong because human beings are not accidents. Human beings are created in the image of God for a purpose, and that is why to look down on another human being for a gender reason, for a racial reason, is wrong.
For what
Absolutely
reason?
wrong.
So do you think that that idea extends to all living beings, not just humans?
I insist there's a difference between a cockroach and you. If I step on a cockroach, I am not going to be responsible for murder. If I step on you and kill you, I will be responsible for murder, for I have violated a human being created in the image of God, and the cockroach is not created in the image of God. You have more value, innate intrinsic value, than a cockroach.
Well, so again, I frankly on a fundamental disagree about why we as people would agree on the fact that killing a human is worse than killing a cockroach. I think, again, we kind of just naturally give more value to things that are like us, or people that are like us, naturally in groups anyway. I mean,
Really?
like, how much can we really relate to a cockroach? And honestly, how much does it really infringe upon our ability to live and frankly be content with ourselves to step on a cockroach? It doesn't, but you have a conscience, right?
Yes.
And of course, that conscience doesn't have to stem from there being some higher entity, right? You
Right.
can have been taught that. Just like some people, frankly, weren't taught that, or for some reason that idea just didn't stick with them and they turned out into what most people would agree to be bad people, rapists, murderers.
Yeah, but just listen to what you're saying. Most people. So majority opinion wins the day. Most people, whatever most people believe, that's right. Whatever most people believe that's wrong, that's wrong. Are you sure that you really believe that and are willing to live that out? So you're going to go around taking a popular opinion vote to figure out what's right and wrong?
Of
I
course
doubt
not.
it. Hopefully not.
Of course not.
Well, then why do you talk about majority opinion? The majority of us agree that stepping on a person is worse than stepping on a cockroach. The question is, why do you believe what you
I don't necessarily
believe?
think that the person who's Jane is any less right than you are. Maybe I don't. I mean, I'm not even saying that that is
Well,
right.
then why would your professor have the audacity to mark your answer on an exam as being wrong? Why don't you just go back to your professor and say, wait a second, that's my opinion, and my opinion, professor, is just as valid as your opinion,
Because
so
the
where do you get off, professor, telling me I'm
isn't
wrong?
going to be, is it okay to step on a cockroach from your moral perspective?
No, but wait, listen to what you're saying. You're saying that majority opinion defines right and wrong. You're saying
I
that my
disagree
opinion,
with that. I disagree
my
with that
opinion
statement.
defines what's
It's
right
called
and
a
wrong.
straw man. I disagree with that statement. I don't think.
Well, then
we
what's
should-
the basis of morality? Give me an answer.
What we as a society try our best to, with haphazard, attempts at government,
Yeah.
to collectively decide
Yeah.
what is right and wrong.
Wow.
The reason we don't just take.
Wow.
So why do you think our laws have to
Yeah.
change?
Well, I'm just real grateful you're not a black person living at the time of the Dred Scott decision. Because all of a sudden, according to the U.S. Supreme Court, you're 3/5 the value of a white person. So you're going to really stand here and tell me that morality is defined by the people in power or the majority opinion or your environment? Give me a break. That's scary. Racism is wrong, not because of anything the U.S. government says. Racism is wrong because we're human beings created in the image of God, and God don't make junk. He makes valuable human beings. But man, you are floating in a sea of relativity that you're going to drown in real quick. In fact, you can't live it out. It's impossible to live it out. Because you know very well that if someone hurts you badly enough, you're not going to say, well, from my relative perspective, what you did was wrong. But I realize it's all just relative. You can't live that way, man. You know you're going to look into someone's face who denigrates you, and you're going to say, that was wrong when you denigrated me. Don't do that again. That's objectively wrong.
Again, you don't know what I would do in any situation.
I'm
right?
betting. You're right. I'm a betting
Okay.
guy.
And what I'm saying is, honestly, I am the kind of person who really, truly does let people walk all over me. You know why? Because I understand that everybody has their own unique lens that they see the world through.
Good.
That I can never even begin to imagine, right? I can never begin to imagine what led them to the point of them thinking what
Correct.
they think.
Good.
However, that doesn't necessarily mean that from my relative subjective moral compass,
Right.
I agree with everything that everybody else says. But I would still consider people who disagree with me to still be moral,
Ma'am,
despite not
I
following
understand.
necessarily a laid out objective.
but you and I are very different. If I see someone stealing from you, I'm not going to say, okay, now, based on your environment that you grew up in, stealing from her is okay, so go ahead, sir, just steal from her. No, I'm not. I'm going to say, don't steal from her, because that's highly disrespectful, so don't steal her stuff. And I can promise you, ma'am, if someone tries to rape you, I'm going to physically get involved and try and stop them. Why? Because I am convinced that rape is wrong. Not because of my environment, not because of my own cultural tradition, but you have a value that comes from your creator, and when a man tries to rape you, that is evil, and I will physically try and stop him.
Rape culture prolifically, especially in non-developed countries.
Yes?
Those kinds of things are considered moral in a lot of areas.
That's correct, and they're wrong.
Exactly.
And Nazi Germany is wrong when it dumps on Jews and has Dachau and Auschwitz and
But
Buchenwald.
sir, there are probably things that I think that you don't think, right? About what? Right.
So the question is, who is the basis of morality?
Well, obviously we disagree on everything, so there must not be an objective basis.
According to your worldview, but I'm saying the way you live your life shows that you do believe that at times, maybe not many times, but a few times, there are objective morals. And I'm saying, guess what? Wake up and smell the coffee. The only way that can be true is if there is some type of mind prior to the human mind who defines and creates human value and right and wrong. Stuart, what do you think?
Well, so you talked about it from an evolutionary perspective. And I was wondering, in terms of the speciesism piece, when it comes to a great white shark eating a fish, why is that not murder versus us? And if you were to kill me, for example, or somebody else, why is that murder?
Because we've developed to a point of sentience where we as a society have signed a moral contract amongst ourselves that is not acceptable. However, I don't think that comes from anything as innate as the way our fingernails are or the way that we look as people. I think that simply comes from the fact that we only give that much value and compassion towards people because we look like each other, we live the same lives, we're able to relate, and it affects us directly, right? So all I'm saying is we necessarily are like sharks in that, I think it's kind of a massive fallacy, right, to equate us to wild animals when the idea of morality doesn't extend to animals that don't have the capacity, right?
But when Daimler, the serial killer, was interviewed on ABC News, he took his atheist position and he said, I am an atheist. I follow my desires. There is no God, no objective morality. So I follow my desires, and that desire was to lead me to kill other human beings. And I get that from Friedrich Nietzsche, the top atheist over the last couple hundred years, who said we must get rid of the idea of humanity having value. We must get rid of the idea of self-pity, of compassion, of morality, because there is no God. We have killed God. We need to live that out. And if you don't live that out, you're pretending to be a Christian and you don't realize it. Secondly, from the evolutionary perspective, it's the whole idea of, oh my goodness, we grew up red in tooth and claw. The strong eat the weak. Now let us love one another. That doesn't line up in any kind of way. That doesn't make sense. You don't just evolve over time to the point of saying, well, no longer does the strong eat the weak, and we're just randomly going to love one another.
I think it's fair to say that if we develop to a point where we have cumulative knowledge, right? We don't just each get to know only the things that, obviously we do only get to know the things we discover in our life, but we get to know so much as people because the people behind us have led us to the point that we're at, right? So I don't think it's necessarily fair to say, and especially to bring up Friedrich Nietzsche and bring up a serial killer. Well, some vegans use secularism to justify being against something called speciesism, which in my opinion is a little bit extreme, but still, the argument can be made it's not okay to even eat animals, because if we've developed to the point of having a moral compass, the idea is actually that we have an obligation to not inflict suffering upon creatures that don't understand having a moral obligation.
So when you have, this true story, when you have a secular feminist author who's big on human rights go down to a certain tribe in Africa and say, I'm going to fix the whole piece of genital mutilation as well as honor killings, because our Western secularism has an understanding of human rights and the value of all people. She goes down, comes back disillusioned, and says, who am I with my incredible ethnicity, Americanism, my elitism, to go down and say your culture is wrong and what you guys are doing is wrong? She said, I had to go back and struggle with, is there an objective moral that is, you ought and should not do that? Rather than coming in and just saying, social contract theory, oh my goodness, cultural, who's right, who's wrong here, we have no idea, and that's elitist.
It's a complex political system that person just tried to interject themselves into, right? And honestly, saying that I'm this Western person that's going to go and fix that is fairly narcissistic in my opinion. That person...
So leave it alone.
No.
Don't go fix it.
No, maybe...
The honor killings are good for them.
No, just because there isn't a yes or no answer doesn't mean that there is no place for there to be dialogue or people to at least try to have some activism or do something. However, I'm not in a position.
But why
and I'm not
ought you to
educated.
do that? The activism piece. Why ought you to go help somebody, especially going back to your evolutionary perspective of morality?
Well, for me-
Why go outside of your tribe to help somebody across the world? That makes no sense. Just stick to your tribe. Say here at UT or here in the US and help
All right.
people in that kind of
Well,
way.
okay, I'm gonna just go ahead and I'm gonna wrap up here because I do want to disengage. I need to get lunch.
It's a great
but,
point. You're making great points, though.
Thank you.
But you were very
Um,
bold to go on the moral argument because Christians typically win that one.
I think like the idea, at least my argument, is that there is no yes or no, and that again, that morality is relative. And I think that it is kind of misframing the argument to say that like, if you believe in morality, there should be a yes or no answer to these situations.
No, I would say when it comes to especially ethics, there is absolutely a spectrum. But when it comes to ultimate morality, objective morality, this ought to be the way it is. This should not be the way it is when it comes to, again, murdering somebody, harming somebody. I think, again, though, back to your evolutionary perspective, okay, you can be good to your neighbor. That makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. But if we're going to form a society in such a way where it's let's social contract, let's everybody fall in line, and somehow by helping each other, we'll get ahead in our culture as a society. Well, what happens with the freeloaders? Why wouldn't I
How
step
have we-
outside
excuse me,
as an
how have we
atheist?
gotten
Hold on one
here?
second.
How
Why
have
would
we
I step
gotten here in the first
outside
place?
and say, well, okay, that's great, but I'm going to be a freeloader because there's no shoulds and oughts, and I'm going to step outside. Nobody else is going to, so I'm going to go ahead and cheat on my taxes. I'm going to go ahead and steal the SAT scores, whatever it might be. From an atheistic perspective, and from your understanding of ethics and morality, that's totally fine. Totally fine. It's called the selfish knave.
Right, but see again, I think it's misrepresenting what I think because I don't agree with doing any of those things. you
Yeah.
just said, right.
Right. No, but I'm not saying you do, but I'm saying the perspective on it. Atheists, I know atheists who are way better than me ethically and morally, but I'm saying, again, the intellectual side of it, the premise does not line up with the functional, how I live it out. Take another example. There are 24 Muslim countries where you as an atheist, the death penalty, it would be meted out on you. In the US, that would absolutely not be the case because it's founded on Judeo-Christian morals, morality, human rights, the worth of every single individual and the rights that they have. They wouldn't just get the death penalty for it. And so you need that type of morality in order to have a just society that I believe is given from God and shown clearly through Jesus Christ.
Right.
I don't really know what I like or dislike, or my beliefs about God, religion, etc.
Yeah.
However, I am a history major,
Good.
and I am fascinated by the various cultures and beliefs across the world. I've studied and I've looked at a multitude of religions, societies, various
Yeah.
sects, etc.
Yeah.
And truth be told, I haven't gone in depth about most of them,
Yeah.
and a lot of them seem quite similar. For
Mhm.
example, which sect of Christianity are you a part of? Catholic, Presbyterian, Baptist?
I am not any part of any sect. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. And I connect with a lot of Catholics and a lot of Protestants in terms of sharing that faith, but I am not part of a sect.
Okay,
I'm a follower of Jesus Christ.
okay.
Now, why as an historian, you're a history major? Why do you think as a history major that I would seriously want to follow Christ based on the history of Christ? Why would you think that?
Oh, it's a good question. I think there's a multitude of answers involved. I mean, perhaps your parents were Christians and raised you to be that way. Perhaps you had individual life experiences which drove you to follow the various beliefs you had. Maybe it was because the God, if there is one, communicated those ideas with you and revealed himself to you in a sense. Or maybe it's because you've come throughout your variety of life experiences to understand your perspective of God from your perspective. Truth be told, I don't know because I as well don't know you and just met you.
Okay, but wait a second, Jacob. I appreciate your honesty, but you evaded my question. My question was not, what experience do you think I've had that has motivated me to believe in Jesus? My question was, you're a history major, so what do you think is the historical evidence for Christ? Why would I, as someone who's concerned about history, follow Christ?
So that's two questions. Let me answer the first one.
Yep.
What do I think is the historical evidence for Christ? Well,
Yes.
there is. I think he's a real person.
Good.
Whether or not he was actually the Son of God is, up to question. I
Yes.
can't really say, nor do I think anyone can. Now, as to the second question, why do you follow Christ, or why would you?
Historically.
Historically, well, I would say historically, following any religion, whether it be that of Jesus Christ, Islam, Zoroastrianism, Baha'ism, etc., primarily as a manner of social, well, I would say social control, but also as a means of community, binding people together, whether it's through a religion, a shared set of values, a culture. Humans have always found larger-than-life reasons to bind themselves together, and I think that is largely, to many extents, a good thing. The societies and the social stability that has created has allowed us to build everything that's around us. Whether or not that's correct or not is, well, something I can't really answer. But my question to you is that throughout all of human history, we have created a plethora of these social beliefs and values, religions, cultures, etc. Take the holy Vedic texts in India, for example, Confucianism in China, all of the various smaller individual tribal beliefs in the density of the Amazon jungle.
Come on, Jacob. Jacob, come on. Stick with the issue. History.
History.
What is the historical reason that any thinking human being would follow Christ, would trust in Christ?
Because of the social control and stability it provides in pre-industrial
It's not
times.
history. What's the historical evidence that points to Jesus Christ being a reliable object for someone to put their faith in? What's the historical evidence? Historically, Jesus said, I'm going to die. 3 days later, I'm going to rise from the dead.
Sure.
Now, did he pull it off?
Good question.
The historical evidence is that 3 days after he died, he rose from the dead. That is a very good historical reason to believe in Jesus Christ.
At taken at face value, you're completely and utterly correct. The records say that 3 days after Jesus died, he rose up. Are they correct? I don't know. Historical records say a vast majority of things. I would contest that the vast majority of primary sources throughout the history of the entire human race are largely incorrect.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So how do you determine what is correct, Jacob?
Well, that's a good question. I think as a history major, that is the most important question to answer.
Good. So would you answer it for me, please? How do you determine what's historically correct?
Well, for one, you do have to look at primary sources and deduce from it what is myth, what is legend, as well as taking a look at a variety of factors from just our modern times looking back, archaeology, studying various bones and records, various temples, cross-examining various historical sources throughout multiple religions to pinpoint an accurate answer. And do I think that that has allowed us to determine whether or not Jesus Christ did in fact rise up after 3 days? No, I do not. Why do you think it has?
Well, you raised 4 great tests. First of all, you go to primary sources. Very good, Jacob. They're teaching you well here at UT. Whenever you want to study history, you better go to primary sources. So you better go to the eyewitness accounts, and we've got them. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, James, eyewitness accounts written in the 1st century, primary source documents. Not only that, Jacob, we have non-Christians who didn't believe in Christ writing about Jesus. Who would they be? Josephus, Tacitus, a Roman historian, Suetonius, a Roman senator who wrote about Jesus, Marabar Serapion, a Syrian philosopher who writes a letter right after 73 AD to his son. And in this letter, Marabar Serapion writes about the crucifixion of Jesus. Then you've got Pliny the Younger, a ruler in the Roman Empire, writing about Jesus as an historical person. Right. So you as a history major here at UT understand the importance of primary sources in finding out whether someone is historically reliable or not.
Sure.
Secondly, you mentioned what? Archaeology. If the Gospels talk about the island of Atlantis out in the ocean that none of us can verify, we're going to be skeptical. We're going to say, time out, no archaeological evidence that the island of Atlantis exists. But that's not what we read about in the Gospels. In the Gospels we read about Galilee, Bethlehem, Nazareth, Rome, Jerusalem, archaeologically verifiable places. So you see, Jacob, the evidence is that historically we have a very accurate record of what Jesus did, what he said, how he died, and how he rose from the dead. That's exciting, Jacob. Wouldn't you be interested in checking that out further?
Really? Well, you see, you've just done a very smart thing debate-wise. I was also in debate in high school.
I never did debate, so.
But you see, you didn't really answer my question.
Of course I did. You asked a historical question, I answered you historically.
But you said, but we see, what I'm asking here is
Yes?
what is the foolproof evidence that Jesus did rise from the dead? Now, you mentioned several authors or several historians that wrote about Jesus. You didn't really say what they wrote about or explain why they're verifiable. And then you mentioned several locations in the Bible that were written down that can be archaeologically verified, such as Galilee, Jerusalem, etc.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Jesus was real.
Good.
He was seen as a Messiah. He was a very well-spoken and significant individual, and he did in fact do those things in locations that were historically, detested and that were historically there.
Good.
But there's something missing there, isn't it?
What's missing?
The connection between that and the actual evidence of Jesus rising up from the dead. Now, sure, we can have historical records, historians from the time, etc., saying this figure, my God, he rose up from the dead. My God. But is that all we need? You told me the location of several major biblically significant locations, Galilee, Jerusalem, etc., in response to my arguments about archaeology, which was only 2 or 4 of my points, but I'll go to that in the future. But what exactly is the connection between those locations and the archaeological evidence that Jesus rose from the dead?
There's no archaeological evidence that Jesus rose from the dead.
Thank you.
The archaeological evidence is that the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are historically reliable documents. That was my point.
Because they said the locations of areas that we know exist? Sure.
Because
every major religious text does that as well.
No, it does
look
not.
at the Quran.
You should not take my interpretation. You should be intellectually open-minded and honest enough to get the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and read them for yourself. Do not take it from me. Read them for yourself, and if you as a history major here at UT have a question about are these documents historically reliable, then Jacob, you've got to do something that I don't think you've done yet. At least you haven't told me, because I've asked you repeatedly this question. How do you determine whether any document is historically reliable? Thanks for sharing these few minutes with us. Stuart and I are 2 of the pastors at Grace Community Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. You can find out more about Grace Community Church by going to gracecommunity.info. Every Sunday morning we have a 9 o'clock service at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Darien, Connecticut. It's right off exit 37 of the Merritt Parkway. And then we have a 10 o'clock service at Grace Farms, which is located at 365 Lukeswood Road in New Canaan, Connecticut. Hope you can join us this coming Sunday morning. Have a blessed day.